So this is the continuation of the first part of the Holocaust notes. So we are talking about what was happening in Europe with beliefs and ideas about Jewish people that would make the Holocaust, where the Nazis wanted to mistreat and eventually destroy Jewish people, these things that would make it easier for the Nazis to succeed. So the next thing we're going to talk about, which is very common in Europe, was something called anti-Semitism, which means being prejudiced and doing prejudiced actions towards Jewish people. Well, anti-Semitism was very, very common in Europe and in the world in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Now, because it was very common, this mistreatment, then if you grow up during the late 1800s and early 1900s, you are hearing anti-Jewish thoughts, anti-Jewish beliefs. And as you hear these things and see actions that were negative towards Jewish people with their businesses or with the physical mistreatment, as you see these and grow up during these times, you just begin to accept these as this is how it is. So if we just think about our own lives, as we grow up in our early years, all the way up to our teen years and 20 years, what our parents think, what our friends think, what we hear on the news, what we hear in school, those ideas seep into our minds, and those ideas become the ideas that we embrace and that we believe in too. This topic I'm talking about is called socialization. It's kind of where you learn how society works. You learn what to do, when to do things, why to do things. Well, of course, when you are a youngster, believing these things and hearing these anti-Jewish thoughts, you just think that's natural. Of course, when you reach a certain age, these negative thoughts that you have learned, it's up to you to embrace them and continue to live with them, or to reject them and go a different route. Well, remember, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi high-ranking officials grew up in the late 1800s when anti-Jewish thoughts and actions were common. So is it easy to understand that if they grew up in a time when anti-Jewish thoughts and actions are common, they would also accept those anti-Jewish thoughts and actions? Now, I am not excusing them for the mass murder that they would carry out, but we could see that if anti-Jewish thoughts and actions were common, they would embrace them because that's just how people did things. Next, I want to talk about a belief that the Nazis would propagate, something called racial warfare. So it says that the Nazis believed that history was a war among the races. The Jews had a goal to dominate the world, or so the Nazis thought. The Jews did not, but the Nazis thought that, and they began to spread that idea. It says the Nazis believed that Jewish dominance would block the dominance of Aryans, or this perfect German person that the Nazis said that they were trying to create. It says it was the Nazi duty to eliminate this Jewish presence so the Nazis could dominate. All right. Next, it says the Nazis believed that Jewish racial origin made the Jewish people criminals who could never be cured, so they were hopelessly corrupt and inferior. So the Nazis would put this idea out that Jewish people, it was a race to be Jewish, and by the way, it's not a race. Anybody can choose to follow the Jewish faith or not, but the Nazis said that being a Jew was a race. So you're born with these thoughts and these qualities because that's your race. And if you're born with these things, like physical things, you really can't change those. So the Nazis said if you're born corrupt, you have to get rid of people who are corrupt. It says here, a belief of Jewish, but other groups too, but a belief of Jewish inferiority led to practices to limit them and eventually destroy them. Some of these practices existed before the Nazis took over, and these practices would be common in other places around the world, and the Nazis would take these practices and build upon them. One of these practices is a branch of science called eugenics. Eugenics is a field of science that believed that heredity was the cause of inferiority. So you are born being inferior, and there's nothing you can do about it. So this field of eugenics said to cure groups of inferior people, selective breeding is the way to go. So if you have people who have bad physical traits, how do you make it so that they do not have children that have these same negative physical traits? Well, you selectively breed. Essentially, it says that those who have bad physical traits are not allowed to have children. Well, how do you make it so that someone cannot have children? Well, you perform an operation on them. You sterilize them so they do not have the ability to be fathers or the ability to be mothers. That's the idea behind eugenics. And eugenics was a popular branch of science. Where was that branch of science popular? It was in Nazi Germany. But where was it popular first? It was popular in the United States. It says here, eugenics was studied in America and led to sterilization laws in many states in America. Indiana was the first state to have sterilization laws. That started in 1907. Eventually, 30 states would follow with sterilization laws that would say that people with certain traits could not have children, and they would go through an operation where they would be sterilized. Eugenics was popular in America from the 1910s all the way to the 1940s. In 1924, for example, California sterilized 3,000 people. I have not found that Ohio has had sterilization laws. So the point being here is that thoughts and actions against so-called inferior people were not particular to Germany alone during this time period. Even the U.S. had these awful beliefs and even tried to do something about them. Of course, the Nazis would go way beyond what America and other countries would think. The United States even showed its anti-Jewish and anti-certain people bias when in 1924 the United States made the immigration law called the National Origins Act. And this limited immigration from people from Southern Europe and Southeastern Europe. People from these parts, as well as Jewish people, Americans believed, produced a high number of low intelligence, diseased, and criminal children. It's not true, but Americans believe that. And if people from this part of Europe and Jewish people lived this way or had these bad characteristics, then America said, we don't want you here. So we made laws to limit them. Next, the Nazis in the German Holocaust is our topic. So it said the Nazis quickly passed laws about handicapped people. One of those laws was called the Law to Prevent Offspring with Hereditary Defects. The name kind of tells you what it does. Well, it provided for mandatory sterilization of all people in Germany considered to be suffering from certain diseases, like mental illness, physical deformity, mental retardation, epilepsy, and blindness. Those people were forcibly sterilized. So the idea is that you're not good enough, and we don't want your traits to be born later on, so we're going to sterilize you. In 1939, Adolf Hitler and the Nazis began a secret program called the T4 program to exterminate and kill all handicapped people. This extermination process with handicapped people would be the forerunner of what the Nazis would eventually do in the death camps. However, though, public opinion against this murdering of handicapped people in Germany was so high, the Nazis canceled the program. Finally, it says all schools in Germany would teach of racial inferiority of non-Aryans. This probably contributed to many Germans doing very little to stop the Holocaust. So, this is the second part of the notes that I try to explain what's going on in Germany, but also in the world that would lead to eventual mass murder of millions of people.